Fish aren't meant to be in a box, kid. It does things to you.
Alright, let's get all the paddock jokes out of the way. Right, now that that's out of my system, Finding Nemo somehow got even better for me on a rewatch, to the point that I currently enjoy the film more now than I ever have before. And, to be honest, I don't actually know why. Like, I didn't exactly have some kind of big revelation about this film which made me appreciate it more. Instead, I just found myself getting a lot more enjoyment out of this film than I remembered, just because. And the only logical explanation that I can think of for this is that, just like with all the other 2000s Pixar movies, I have major nostalgia for this film, so I may just now be at the age where the sentimentality elevates the movie more in my mind. Or maybe the film just gets better when you get older. I'm not entirely sure. Although, I do think that there is probably a lot of truth in that latter point, because, as I'm sure most of you know, this film does have a sufficient number of messages for the adults watching, which is exactly what the best Pixar movies do. It often feels like whenever classic Pixar movies are being pitched, one of the first questions that is being asked by the creative team is, what is the appeal for the adults? Now, I have no idea whether this kind of conversation occurred behind the scenes, but nonetheless, this idea that I have applies to basically all of the 2000s Pixar movies, and Finding Nemo is no exception. Whilst the film is obviously a fun adventure movie that kids can get a lot of entertainment out of, the real heart and substance of the film is all related to a mature idea of a helicopter parent learning to let his kid become more independent as he grows up and enters the rest of the world. It's a message which parents specifically will absolutely connect with, and I think that fact honestly makes Finding Nemo one of Pixar's best family movies, because it's a movie that everyone in the family can enjoy, and arguably the messages of the film are aimed directly at the parents first and foremost, in a similar vein to what Bluey would do decades later. Now yes, the parenting themes here are quite simple in its messages, and I do definitely think that the Pixar films ranked higher on this list are a bit richer thematically. However, this film still absolutely nails everything that it sets out to do. All of the themes are conveyed clearly, and they work within the main narrative and build to satisfying conclusions. An example of how well executed the ideas for this film are can be seen through how characters such as Dory are used in relation to Marlin's arc. Because of Dory's short-term memory loss, she essentially acts like a lost kid in a big world, which thus parallels how Marlin sees Nemo. Marlin is constantly afraid that something bad will happen to Nemo, because he underestimates him and lets his anxieties take over. However, Nemo is actually more competent than Marlin gives him credit for. Yet Dory is constantly keeping Marlin on his fins and making reckless decisions. However, Dory's presence ends up acting as a catalyst for Marlin's growth, as he soon realizes that he's not always correct about the world. He saw Dory as stupid and reckless, yet got humbled as a result of the consequences with the jellyfish bloom, and eventually he learns to trust Dory over his own anxious judgment when they're in the whale, which thus ends up working wonderfully in their favour. And as a result of his increasing openness to Dory's wild ideas, he learns that he should also be more open to what Nemo thinks and does. It's a great way to use what could have been nothing more than the comic relief sidekick as a way to develop the protagonist further. So yeah, Marlin's arc throughout this film is very, very good. But interestingly, his character arc could have been very different within this film. You see, in initial drafts of the script, the traumatic barracuda scene which every child skipped over on their DVD was planned to be a twist saved for the very end of the film. Marlin was originally going to start out as the overbearing, overprotective father, until his reasons were eventually explained to the characters and the audience in a much later scene in the film. Now, this definitely would have been quite interesting to see. However, I am so glad that this was changed, as it would have made Marlin too unlikable before that point, which thus would have made the film and his character arc much harder to connect with. Yet, in the final film, the prologue helps to make Marlin a lot more sympathetic and understandable within these earlier scenes during an audience's first viewing. And it also makes scenes like Nemo's rebellion a lot more compelling for the audience, as we're unsure of who to side with, as both Nemo and Marlin are justified, yet wrong at the same time. Marlin should go easier on Nemo, but at the same time, it was still really stupid and dangerous of Nemo to go and touch the butt. And I'd say that overall, Marlin's clear hardships, such as his tragic backstory and the difficult journey he went on to find Nemo, helped to make his eventual reunion with Nemo so damn satisfying and sweet. So yeah, the family stuff is definitely quite simple in its execution, but it is still so damn great. For a movie titled Finding Nemo, it's good that the audience actually wants Nemo to be found, rather than just thinking, fuck it, don't bother getting him. However, alongside the compelling drama, this film is also so damn entertaining. Honestly, now that I think about it, I think this might just be the funniest Pixar movie. The tank scenes especially really stuck out to me comedically. I know not everyone likes the scenes in the dentist's office, however, I personally love them. I mean, first of all, these scenes star Willem Dafoe, which is always a win. Oh, and side note, but between this and The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, I have to ask, what was up with Willem Dafoe's obsession with the ocean in the early 2000s? Actually, wait a minute, there was also The Lighthouse in 2019. Dafoe just loves the sea, I guess. Anyway, alongside Dafoe, these scenes really are just top tier comedically for me. Not every joke's a winner, but I can't take away from the fact that so many of these scenes are burned into my subconscious. This includes the over-the-top initiation scene, the plan to escape, Darla entering the office accompanied by the Psycho theme, the escape scene itself, and, finally, this kid's reaction to all the crazy shit. It's all amazing. Although, alongside being funny, I will still say that I think these scenes do still have their worth thematically, as it allows for Nemo to sympathise more with his dad as he comes to realise the true danger that's really out there, which thus helps with his reconciliation. Plus, being more aware of the dangers also helped him to become braver, which thus allowed him to save all the fish at the end after Marlin learns to let him go. Once again, every part of this movie is meticulously crafted to fit together like clockwork, and it is just brilliant to see. Although, going back to the topic of comedy, the tank scenes are not the only funny moments within this film, as Marlin's social awkwardness combined with Albert Brooks' line delivery is just stellar. The "mine" seagulls are still like the funniest thing to me, and many of the side characters, such as the legend that is Crush, bring me so much joy and always make me chuckle. Also, this is just a me thing, but I really love Australian accents, so I often found myself enjoying the film a little bit more because of the large presence of these accents. And alongside the pure comedy, the main ocean adventure itself is just so much fun with too many memorable scenes to count, like the shark chase with the Shining reference, the impressively animated jellyfish and whale scenes, the epic Crush moments, and this scene, which gave me a fear of anglerfish that I still have today. Oh, and speaking as someone with thalassophobia, please tell me I'm not the only one who got major anxiety during that scene in the empty void. The pure emptiness of it all, coupled with the constant potential danger, just freaked me out so much. Yeah, I don't like the ocean. It's scary. Anyway, with all this praise that I've been giving this movie, is there anything wrong with it? Well, I have got one main flaw, but it is pretty minor. Whilst this movie is mostly comedic genius, some of the jokes definitely didn't land for me, as I previously said. And sadly, the vast majority of these weak jokes come from Dory. Now, I don't mind Dory overall. It sucks that she's played by Ellen DeGeneres, but she's nonetheless an enjoyable enough character, and she is definitely necessary for the story and themes. But for me, some of the short-term memory loss jokes got old fast. It sometimes just felt like the film was riding off the Memento hype, and not much more. With that being said though, I still love the rest of this film and I will continue to watch it again and again. It's got a lot of heart, great humour, and I think that the fact that I always have a desire to rewatch this film just goes to show how much I truly love it. Also, I didn't mention this earlier because I thought it went without saying, but for a 20-year-old film, this movie's gorgeous for the most part. How the hell did he do this water in 2003? I am astonished. And alongside the visuals, Randy Newman's score for this film is one of my personal favourite non-Giacchino scores. It's just beautiful. Overall, I can totally understand why this is a favourite for so many Pixar fans, and I also understand why it was the favourite film of my secondary school science teacher. She had good film taste, what can I say? However, I just personally have quite a few other movies that I like just a little bit more than this. But before I talk about them, I just have to point out one more thing. Did you know that one of the Australian crabs referred to Dory as Bluey?
Yeah, I saw him, Bluey.
I just wanted to put this information out there for you all.
So, I have abducted a fat Boy Scout. Anyone remember what happens next?
Okay, so Up has a bit of a reputation for being a film which people judge solely on its opening. And that is definitely a fair critique which you can level towards a lot of people who review this movie. And I'll admit that it is something which I have done in the past whilst praising this film. So, as a compromise, I am going to begin this segment by reviewing the film without even bringing up the married life segment, unless absolutely necessary. This way, I can show that I still have positive opinions on the rest of the film. Sound cool? Alrighty then. So, Up is easily one of the Pixar films with the most amount of heart and whimsy to it. It is an inherently sweet and cute movie which does not fail in bringing a smile to your face throughout many moments. Whilst I will admit that many parts of this film, particularly the stuff within Paradise Falls, can be a bit simplistic as the plot becomes nothing more than get from point A to point B, it is nonetheless still very entertaining. I mean, first of all, the concept of this film is so damn fun. Okay, sure, the idea of flying a house across South America is absolutely a wacky concept which could have only been made by people who sniff more glue than Mr. Maker, but I still think that it is so much fun to see unfold and it is executed in a brilliant way. And I think the main reason for why it works so well is because the film is almost dreamlike in a way. It contains many different seemingly random plot points which only really make sense within dream logic, but I think it ultimately works here because Paradise Falls was always Carl's dream. Therefore, it makes sense for why the film feels like a fantasy dream at many points, especially with the inclusion of the many absurd plot beats, like the aforementioned flying house alongside the talking dogs and the two old men having a cane fight. Because this film seems to follow this kind of dream logic, it ultimately ends up feeling less stupid and more so creative and exhilarating, which contrasts well with the drab opening scenes. In fact, alongside the fantastical adventure plot, the colours also do an especially great job at distinguishing between reality and the fantasy-like world of Paradise Falls, with the opening being very grey and bland, whilst the adventure is so much more pleasantly colourful. Not only are all the balloons an explosion of colour, but the greenery feels greener here than anywhere else in the movie, and Kevin is also quite colourful in their character design. But why does this film follow this kind of dream logic, you may ask? Well, as I said before, Paradise Falls is Carl's dream which he made with Ellie. However, Carl's biggest problem within the film is the fact that he can't move past his grief over Ellie's death. But by the end of the film, he learns to let go of the past. The film follows Carl's journey towards the Falls as he tries to fulfill his past dream and his past promise to his wife, until he ends up leaving the Falls by the end of the film after no longer caring so much about trying to fulfill his promise. Carl essentially has to let go of and leave his dreams behind, and that's how he's able to fully grow as a character in a satisfying way. And the dreamlike nature of the plot isn't the only reflection of Carl's arc, as there's other things which do that as well, such as with the house itself. You see, Carl cares more about getting his house to Paradise Falls over anything else. He scolds others when they damage it, and he even sacrifices Kevin to Munt in order to save his house from being nearly burnt down. He put an inanimate object over a sentient life. However, by the end of the film, he fly tips all his furniture by the falls, ruins the natural environment, and then uses his now lighter house in order to rescue Kevin and Russell, before ultimately letting it fly away at the end, stating that it is just a house. The house is essentially a manifestation of Carl's love and memories of Ellie, but as he lets the house go, he lets go of the grief which he was stuck with. This is a really beautiful and important message, but I also like how the film does still show that Carl letting his house go is a hard thing for him to do. The scene is presented in an emotional way with soft music and that same feeling of loss which permeates throughout the entire film, which thus shows that it is definitely still hard to move past grief, no matter how necessary it ultimately is. All of this thematic stuff is so damn strong, and I think it works so well because of the adventure and the dreaminess of it. The film does still have substance to it, outside of just the opening. But in saying that though, my biggest problem with this film is definitely the pacing within the adventure itself, especially during the first half. I'll admit that it did drag for me at a few points, and I definitely feel like some of the thematic depth is kinda lost within these middle scenes until we reach the climax. And this is ultimately the main reason for why I don't love this movie as much as I did a few years ago. However, this really isn't that big of an issue for me, as the exciting as hell climax more than makes up for it. Plus, as I alluded to before, the film is still consistently endearing and charming. But what truly elevates the film for me are the characters. Now, I already talked about Carl's brilliant arc, and that definitely plays a part into why I thought he was a brilliant protagonist. But I also like the way that the first act set up his character, particularly through how his childhood showed him as being quite socially awkward, thus setting up how lost he ends up feeling after Ellie's death. Plus, due to the fact that we can clearly see how jaded and cynical Carl has become in his latter years, it is a lot more satisfying to see him selflessly make the effort to save Kevin and Russell at the end. So yeah, Carl is an amazing character, but the side characters are also really great. Firstly, I actually quite like Russell. I didn't find him annoying and instead found him quite funny. Plus, he felt like a very believable child character. I also thought that Charles Muntz was a really solid twist villain, and I think that the main reason for why I felt this way was because the film doesn't try to make him a twist villain. Anyone with a brain could tell you that he's going to be the villain, because various things clearly gave it away, such as the vicious dogs and the fact that he's the only other major human character within the film. So if he's not the villain, then who else will be? Therefore, the film is able to do a great job at gradually building tension throughout the scenes with him, until the characters finally realise that Muntz is the villain. This is most noticeably prevalent within the dinner scene, which is legitimately edge of your seat stuff by the end. And then, by the final act, he really does become a substantial threat. Even if his intimidation does play second fiddle to the dogs such as Alpha, I am holding back everything to not make an Alpha and Omega joke. And speaking of the dogs, let's talk about one of my personal favourite Pixar characters. Doug. I love this dog with every fibre of my being. He's adorable, hilarious, loyal, and always a joy to see. He is the perfect representation of what a golden retriever is like, and I also love his ADHD brain, as evident from the fact that he's always getting distracted by squirrels mid-conversation. Just like me, for real. Doug constantly has the best jokes in the movie. But alongside him, I would say that the film is pretty successfully humorous throughout. I especially like the leaf blower jokes, they were pretty funny. And alongside all of this, I really appreciated the subtlety of this film. You see, there are many plot details and scenes within this film which aren't explicitly stated to the audience, but you're still able to pick up on the deeper meanings of them, especially as you get older. Some of these deeper, subtle implications include Ellie's supposed miscarriage, or the fact that Russell's parents don't seem to be together anymore. It adds a lot to the film and allows you to get more out of it as you get older. So yeah, there's just so much that I adore about this movie. But the strongest part of this film is undoubtedly the emotion. Yeah, I can't hold it in anymore. The opening montage is a 100 out of 10 sequence. It is absolutely perfect in every way, and it is one of my favourite scenes in all of film history, and it is a scene which consistently makes me bawl my eyes out. There is a very good reason for why it is so beloved, and you really don't need me to explain it. I feel like that would just cheapen it, honestly. However, alongside this iconic opening, there's also the scrapbook scene later on, which is just as emotional and beautiful, and it's what truly cements Carl's change of heart. Once he realizes how happy his wife was despite never achieving her dream, Carl is truly able to find peace with his own life, and thus he's able to move past his grief. And the scene is also a great parallel with an earlier scene with Russell where he talks about how much he valued these seemingly boring moments with his dad, because the connection was what was truly special to him. And that was exactly how Ellie felt about her normal life with Carl, and oh man, this movie's just so precious. Okay, so I probably hear my voice, but I just rewatched the scrapbook scene, and God, as I was recording this, I sobbed so much. Yeah, I know everyone always talks about the opening scene being the emotional one, but the scrapbook scene is, like, just as good. It is, oh my god. And I obviously can't talk about the emotion without mentioning Michael Giacchino's magnum opus of a score. It is a score so powerful that simply listening to it can bring out the tears. It is just simply perfect, but it can also be really exciting and adventurous when it needs to be, especially within the climax. So overall, Up is a really strong movie which I love to bits. I may not find it as perfect as I used to, however, it nonetheless features many god-tier scenes which are some of the best from this entire list, and I definitely think that this movie deserved its Oscars, especially for Best Original Score, and it even deserved its Best Picture nomination, I'd say. In saying that though, there are still two movies that I prefer to this film, which arguably deserved Best Animated Feature slightly more, but I'd happily let them share a Best Picture nom alongside Up, although that obviously would never happen. Either way, I wouldn't personally call Up overrated in the slightest, unlike some other people, because there's plenty of stuff that I love here outside of the opening 10 minutes.
How did you know I was a gamer?
I still distinctly remember how I felt when I first saw the trailer for Wreck-It Ralph back in like 2012 or something. I must have been around the age of 6 or 7 at the time, and back then, Mario and Sonic were big parts of my life. I mean, Mario still is, but that's beside the point. So imagine my excitement when I see this trailer for a Disney movie which features Sonic, Dr. Eggman, and Bowser! I was absolutely ecstatic. So ecstatic in fact that I am convinced that I was more excited for Wreck-It Ralph than I was for Avengers Endgame 7 years later. And then when I finally saw the film, I loved it. In fact, I was kind of obsessed with it, and I honestly completely forgot how obsessed with it I was until I rewatched it for this ranking and was reminded of so many random, distinct childhood memories that I had associated with it. And the biggest flashback occurred when I was just mucking around on the Blu-ray menu and rediscovered the behind-the-scenes documentary for this film, where the creative team talk about how they created all the different worlds present. This was one of the first behind-the-scenes documentaries I ever saw as a kid, and I was absolutely fascinated by it to the point that I would rewatch this 15-minute special feature constantly. Every time I rewatched the movie, I had to rewatch the behind the scenes immediately afterwards. And after coming back to it once again as an adult, I think I've come to the realization that this may have been where my love for filmmaking started from. I'm being serious, I was just so fascinated by the creative possibilities present, and this doc basically led to me saying at a young age that I wanted to do that. So thank you Wreck-It Ralph for being inadvertently responsible for where I'm currently at in life. I guess I kinda owe it a lot in that regard, even if it technically wasn't even the movie itself which inspired me. Anyway, inspired my initial love for this movie, I've noticed that over time, my opinions on this film have become quite inconsistent. In contrast to the 2000s Pixar movies which I've consistently loved throughout my entire life, my opinions on Wreck-It Ralph have always fluctuated from me calling the film just great, to calling it absolutely fantastic, and then back again. I don't know why this has constantly happened for me, but nonetheless, when I last saw this film back in 2021, my opinions were, this is a great 8 out of 10 film. But now, after this rewatch, I am firmly in the fantastic 9 out of 10 mindset, and there are many reasons for why I find myself loving this film nowadays. Some of these reasons are consistent with my younger self, but there were also many new points that I picked up on now that I'm a bit older. But either way, I think that the most obvious compliment that I can give towards this film right out of the gate is the fact that its world building is top tier. I just adore the way that this arcade world was portrayed, especially regarding things like Game Central Station, which is really just the main plug socket for the arcade machines, and can be accessed by the sentient game characters via the cables themselves. That is an ingenious idea, and is also a really nice, convenient way to allow the characters to cross between the games, which lets these to find interactions between different groups of characters like a Pac-Man or Tappers. But the main thing which I appreciated about the world building here was how much it embraced the medium of video games through various little references and plot points. Examples include things like the coding and the fear of game glitches. All of this just helps the film to truly capture the feel of the games in a way. But it's not just the world building which reflects this feeling, as the animation does so as well. As shown in the epic making of documentary that I was obsessed with, the creative team opted to use slightly different animation techniques and art styles for all of the different games in order to reflect the differing times that they were made. Whilst Hero's Duty is pretty realistic outside of some exaggerated proportions here and there, Fix-It Felix Jr. is very blocky, and the characters move in straight lines rather than diagonals in order to reflect the 8-bit nature of the game. It's honestly a genius piece of visual storytelling which helps each game world to feel distinct from the others. Now, I know not everyone likes 3D animation all that much, but I definitely think that this is one of the best uses of it, as this technique could not be achieved as effectively in 2D, especially when modern games use 3D graphics. As a whole, between the layout of the world and the animation techniques used, you could just tell that the creative team for this movie really did their homework on everything that you could possibly think of regarding video games, and that is what helps this world to feel so natural, seamless, and timeless. And in a strange way, I actually think that the various references to many real-world video games help with this. Now yes, it can be easy to look at this movie in hindsight and cringe at the presence of various real-world video game brands like the aforementioned Mario and Sonic, as well as other franchises like Street Fighter and whatnot. However, at the time that this film was made, the inclusion of these characters didn't feel like corporate branding or generic pop culture references. It instead felt like necessary inclusions in order to flesh out this world, and, to me anyway, their inclusion felt cute and fun rather than pandering. So yeah, I wouldn't have them any other way. But I think that the main reason for why these references aren't a problem for me is because these branded characters are nothing more than cameos. The references are often in the background and instead play second fiddle to the actual main characters who we are supposed to engage with. They don't detract our attention away from the main narrative, because the film still primarily focuses on the protagonist, and I personally feel like that's the best way to handle external references within a film. And speaking of which, let's talk about these main characters. Now, for me, all of the main characters within this movie are absolutely fantastic in one way or another. Calhoun and Felix both crack me up, and their growing love story in the B-plot is absolutely hilarious for me, and I never tire of cutting back to them because they are always entertaining. And speaking of entertaining, there's King Candy, who is just a fantastic villain in every way. He's pretty hammy and over the top at points, but that's what makes him fun to watch. Yet, he nonetheless poses a legitimate threat by the end of the film, especially when he turns into that horrifying mutant cyborg monstrosity. I'll be honest, this thing still kinda freaks me out. Oh, and the turbo twist was really strong, I feel. It was set up really well in an earlier scene, which, on the surface, seemed to be nothing more than an explanation for why Ralph's actions are potentially damaging. But then it comes back later when it's revealed that King Candy was Turbo all along, and it's such a cool little surprise which helps to keep the audience on their toes. But I think that the main reason for why the twist works so well here is because it doesn't detract from King Candy's menace whatsoever. He's still able to remain as goofy and threatening as he always was. All this twist does is give him further depth and a backstory. So yeah, King Candy is awesome, and he's probably the last good Disney villain. Which is very sad to say, seeing as this film came out 13 years ago and no one else has even come close. Jesus Christ, was this film really 13 years ago? Oh my goodness. Anyway, whilst King Candy, Felix and Calhoun are all entertaining in their own ways, the main reason for why I loved this film so much on this latest rewatch was thanks to Ralph and Vanellope. These two are just brilliant, plain and simple. Not only is their dynamic really funny, but the emotional moments with them really hit me hard on this latest rewatch. And the reason for why I got so invested in them and their struggles is because this movie is an autism allegory and no one can convince me otherwise. Think about it. Both characters are seen as different, and that causes them to feel mistreated in some way. Ralph is stuck living in the garbage, whilst Vanellope is bullied by everyone for being a glitch. Even though she's not a glitch, she just has pixlexia, and whoever wrote that line deserves a raise. However, in spite of these societal problems, the pair of them form a genuine connection with each other, because they were the first people who truly understood the other. And that's not all, as the characters themselves inhibit a lot of similar traits to those on the spectrum. I mean seriously, just watch the way that Vanellope acts and you'll understand what I mean. It's no coincidence that I found Vanellope really relatable, to be honest. I mean, I don't know about any of you, but I've definitely had moments where I felt like I kinda glitched from reality in a way. And I know that I'm not the only one who relates to Vanellope, as there's also my dad. I don't know if you remember, but I said all the way back in the Frozen segment that he saw Elsa as his literally me character. Well, he also feels the exact same way towards Vanellope. So yeah, she's just like us for real. And alongside Vanellope, I also found Ralph's mindset and eventual growth within this movie to be really strong. Ralph is so caught up in his negative headspace that he kind of rejects the world around him, so much so that he misses out on opportunities to actually find a connection with people who would get him. The bad Anon, I still don't know how it's pronounced, shown at the start, would have been a perfect place for him to feel more comfortable with himself, but he never wanted to go for the longest time, most likely because he still feels some sense of insecurity and shame of who he is. Yet, when he's forced to team up with Vanellope, he's able to find this appreciation that he's been looking for, as he's now being treated as something more than just the bad guy. And this acceptance from others allows Ralph to accept himself for who he is. So yeah, Wreck-It Ralph is a movie about the power of kindness and loving yourself. This is literally the exact same message as Mary and Max, and that movie was explicitly about neurodivergency, so that therefore means that this film must also be about the same thing. Boom, case closed. So yeah, that's why I love Ralph and Vanellope so much, and why I connect with this movie a lot more nowadays. However, the only, and I mean the only, major flaw with this movie for me are the Nicelanders. I just don't get what the film was attempting with them. I get that they are meant to be a reflection of Ralph's insecurities about himself, but for me, they just come across as so unnecessarily mean for literally no reason. And by they, I really just mean Big Gene. Fuck Big Gene. All my homies hate Big Gene. At least the Sugar Rush inhabitants had a reason to be dicks, as King Candy made Vanellope a glitch and erased all of their memories. The Nicelanders, meanwhile, are just not nice. Until they're suddenly nice at the end for, once again, literally no reason. Why the hell did they turn so suddenly? In fact, by the end of this film, Ralph nearly got their game unplugged, so if anything, they should hate him even more than they did before. I mean, I'm glad they don't, but still. Also, why couldn't Gene have ended up in the garbage like Ralph imagined? That's truly all he deserves. Oh well, one shitty character doesn't change the fact that this is easily one of Disney's greatest achievements post-2010. It's funny, it's emotional, it's better neurodivergent representation than Rain Man, and it's such a brilliant love letter to video games. But I still find it really weird that this is a classic Disney movie, as it just screams Pixar due to its tight story and strong world building. Yet instead, Pixar in 2012 made a princess story. What was with this bizarre Disney Pixar role reversal in 2012? Like, I really don't get it. Oh, and speaking of Brave, I will never understand how that film beat Wreck-It Ralph for the Oscar. Ralph absolutely deserved to win, as it's the best film of the 2012 batch, and I will never understand why it didn't. I mean, you just know that the Academy messed up if even Nintendo hated this upset. Or maybe the Academy could have given the award to Paddock, seeing as it's better than all of these nominees. I know it wasn't on the shortlist because it's too niche, but I don't care, it's a masterpiece. Oh well, Wreck-It Ralph is still a banger at the end of the day, and I'm so glad that they never made a sequel.
And one thing I can tell you, Alex. Monsters are real.
While Shrek winning the first Oscar for this category was deserved and helped to pave the way for future competition within the animation industry, I, as well as a lot of other people, can still confidently say that it was the weaker movie that year in comparison to Monsters, Inc., which is yet another true Pixar classic. It is genuinely unreal how consistently phenomenal Pixar was during the 2000s. They were literally unstoppable for a decade straight, and Monsters, Inc. definitely started that decade off strong for them. I mean, right off the bat, I have to say that this is easily one of the most creative films ever made. Forget Pixar films or animated films, just films in general. This story is all about the monsters that kids supposedly see under their beds, and it basically asks the question of what if these monsters were real and had their own world. That's already a super fun concept, but then the film takes it one step further by explaining why the monsters scare the kids. It's because the scream energy provides them with clean, renewable energy. That is such a genius story idea that I am actively jealous of it. Like, I could never dream of coming up with something that ingenious. It's just not fair that other people can be that smart. It's movies like this that remind me that Pete Docter is without a doubt one of the most imaginative directors at Pixar, who can successfully create elaborate, dynamic worlds brimming with ingenious ideas, while still telling wonderful stories within these worlds. I've already spoken about how much I love Up, and that was definitely creative in its own way, and as you will see later, he's made some other masterpieces too. But, to this day, Monsters Inc. is without a doubt his most creative work. I honestly just can't get over how brilliant this film truly is from a story and world-building perspective. Movies like this just gave me so much respect for Pete Docter. Which is why his downfall nowadays has pissed me off so much. Why has he become a generic anti-art corporate head? Come on, Pete, you are the chosen one! I loved you! Sorry, I went a bit overdramatic there. But anyway, alongside being a clever film, Monsters Inc. is also a really engaging, funny, heartfelt watch. Although, I will admit that I kind of forgot how small scale this film really felt for a lot of its runtime. I mean, when you really think about it, most of the film is just Mike, Sully and Boo running around the factory, and it only really gets expanded upon further in the final act with that amazing door sequence. However, I still think that this smaller scale really works. I mean, first of all, Monsters Incorporated is just a really cool location to spend the runtime in. I don't know about you, but I really like these kinds of factory settings. I think they're cool places to tell stories in, and I think the main reason for why I feel this way is because films set in factories almost always lead to a scene set in an area you can't usually go to. And that is always super fascinating for me and my overly imaginative brain. If I see a place where I'm not allowed to go, I always love imagining what it's really like to be there. It's why I love the airport stuff in Toy Story 2, and it's also why I love the door sequence so much here. As a kid, when I first watched this movie, I was so curious about where the doors went, which meant that I was so hyped when we got to see it properly. And the scene itself did not disappoint, as it is so much fun to watch, and it is, once again, so damn creative. But going back to the slower paced first half, I think another reason for why it works so well is because it allows for a lot of substantial character growth, particularly in the form of the growing fatherly relationship that Sully develops for Boo, which is so precious to watch throughout the entire runtime. Their wholesome dynamic is what allows the ending of this film to truly hit as hard as it does, as we don't want to see these great characters separated. We know deep down that they have to leave each other, but we don't want them to. But thankfully, we have those final 20 seconds which are about as perfect a way to end a movie as possible. God damn you, Pete Docter, you're making me cry again. So yeah, Sully and Boo's relationship is beautiful and precious, and I love it. But I also love Sully's relationship with Mike. Despite the fact that we never see the pair meet for the first time in this film, we instantly buy their connection and friendship, and I think that the main reason for why is because we can very clearly see how much they truly have each other's back. They banter and joke with each other, but at the end of the day, they are good colleagues who are constantly able to motivate one another. Mike is always getting Sully ready in the morning, and Sully willingly covers for Mike in his misplaced paperwork. And alongside these simple things at the start of the film, I also really love seeing how determined Sully was to rescue Mike after he was kidnapped. He didn't hesitate or judge Mike for his stupid actions or anything. He just saw that his friend was in trouble and immediately went to help. That is a fantastic showcase of their friendship. So yeah, the main characters are all fantastic here. However, that does lead me on to my one and only criticism with this film, and that comes from the strain that's put on their friendship. Now, I do think that seeing the pair split up works really well, as due to the fact that they no longer have each other's backs, the stakes are increased that bit further. However, I don't think this breakup really works as well as it could have done, as the two only leave each other for like 5 minutes, until Mike literally shows up again out of nowhere and rejoins the crew. Yeah, that was a bit weird to be honest. I mean, how on earth did Mike get back to the door? Sully took the only sled down the mountain, so how the hell did he get there? So yeah, this was a bit of an annoying plot hole. But alongside that, I personally feel like Mike's motivations could have been slightly tweaked in order to make him more likeable. He's obviously opposed to having Boo with him for various reasons, many of which were quite selfish, but I feel like Mike could have been just a bit more sympathetic if the film emphasized that he was more so worried for Sully's well-being and reputation, and that would reinforce their strong friendship even further. Yeah, as it stands, he's quite selfish within the film, and I don't think he really has a substantial enough character growth to justify some of his early actions. But I can't get too mad at Mike, as he is still likeable and he does still do the right thing at the end of the day. Plus, he's hilarious. Billy Crystal is just absolute gold, what can I say? And his dynamic with John Goodman is literally perfect. Also, some of the slight weaknesses with Mike's character are more than made up for by the fantastic villains. First of all, Randall is a really entertaining antagonist, played to perfection by Steve Buscemi, who is playing Mr. Purple this time instead of Mr. Pink.
Why am I Mr. Pink?
Oh, an unrelated point, it's really funny coming back to this movie now that I've seen The Big Lebowski. I know that Sully and Randall are rivals and everything, but I can't stop thinking of the times that they go bowling together as Walter and Donnie. I did like that deleted scene where Sully pulled out a gun though, that was pretty funny. Anyway, sorry I went on another bloody tangent. The main villain who I actually wanted to draw attention to was Waternoose, who is one of the few actually good twist villains. The thing is, whilst the reveal of his evil intentions are surprising, it's not stupid. His motivations of doing anything to save the company were cleverly foreshadowed within many earlier scenes, and it just makes sense for his character. You perfectly understand why he's doing what he's doing. However, he's still shown to be in the wrong, and is thus defeated at the end. Although the fact that a rich CEO is actually charged and arrested for their crimes is the ultimate proof you need that this film is a work of fiction. However, in spite of the fact that he's obviously a bad guy, he does still show some humanity. Or arachnity, I don't know what word to use, as we can very clearly see that he regrets banishing Mike and Sully for the good of the company. It just makes him a much more layered and interesting antagonist, I feel. Although, on the topic of the company, I have to say that whilst I obviously dig the anti-capitalist themes present here, I equally appreciated how two-sided the film was. Instead of just simply saying corporation bad, the film shows how much people rely on companies for services and work, and how they're kinda screwed without these companies, as shown through everyone losing their jobs after Waternoose's arrest. And so, to combat this, the film ends by giving us a look into the possibility of a more moral company which benefits everyone. And I definitely think that this is a much more creative and clever use of the message within the film. Hey, there's that word again. Clever. This is just a clever movie through and through, with fantastic ideas and world building. It's sweet and wholesome at many points, as Sully and Boo are just precious together. It's absolutely hilarious at points, especially with Mike. It's got a really cool setting, and it's overall just a really tight plot, with brilliant but logical twists throughout. It's a film which is simultaneously a heartwarming story focused on fatherly love, and a compelling mystery which exposes the evils going on behind closed doors within these kinds of companies. Having just one of these storylines would have been great, but the combination of them both, alongside the creativity of the world, helps to give this film so much substance, which thus makes it one of the Pixar greats. I absolutely adore it. Oh, and because I haven't mentioned it already, the jazzy soundtrack is also absolute perfection in every way, but let's be honest, just like with the rest of this movie, you already know why it's amazing, so I don't exactly need to go on about it any longer.
I like the way you die, boy.
Jeez, I'm on a non-stop Pixar binge it seems. I guess in a similar vein to Aardman, there's just so many Pixar films which I feel similarly positive towards. There's obviously some which I think are weaker, and we'll eventually talk about some which I think are even better, but a lot of their early output consists of really solid films through and through. And even though they're obviously not as good now as they used to be, I still think that Pixar are more than capable of making great films which stand toe-to-toe with the films from their peak, and I think that Soul is a great example of that fact. Yeah, I personally really love Soul. It's got a lot of the same great attributes that other Pixar films have, but I arguably got a little bit more out of the themes and ideas present here in comparison to the films which I just discussed. But I'll start by being quite general with my points, and I'll immediately say that this film is so damn creative in how it presents its ideas. While some parts of the story may be a bit similar to other films about the afterlife, such as A Matter of Life and Death, I still think that Soul does enough of its creative visuals and unique ideas to help itself stand out. I loved the eerie uncertainty of the stairway to heaven, and The Great Before is a brilliant concept which you don't usually see presented within stories, as it's usually the afterlife which gets all the attention. And alongside this presentation of birth and death, some of the other ideas related to the soul are brilliant here, such as the zone. When you're deep into something you're passionate about, it really does feel like you're in your own little bubble of joy and wonder. I know that's how I'm feeling at the moment as I'm writing this segment, and that feeling was presented wonderfully here. I particularly love the way that colour was used. It really allowed for these feelings and representations to truly pop. But alongside the zone, I felt that the portrayal of lost souls was also really compelling and even a bit depressingly realistic for me. But it was nonetheless important to see, and I think it linked in well to the film's main themes, which I'll discuss later. So yeah, I love the stuff in the Soul world. It was creative, it was colourful, and it was fun. It was just a great place for Joe and 22 to vibe in as they got to know each other. However, it's actually the real world scenes which are what truly make this film for me. I mean, first of all, the body swap plotline is quite fun as a creative way to allow 22 to experience the world for the first time through Joe, with her essentially walking a mile in his shoes. However, the reason for why this plotline works so well is thanks to how it links into the main theme all about appreciating the little things in life. 22 has never experienced the world before, and now that she finally gets to, she's excited by all of the little things which we all usually take for granted. She enjoys walking, sitting on a subway, and she even gets a chance to try a genuine New York pizza! She loves all this stuff, and whilst Joe doesn't pay much attention to it initially, he eventually gets a chance to look back on some of the small items that 22 collected, and this allows him to reflect upon everything within his life. This then leads to the beautiful epiphany scene. It is such a well-directed, well-presented, emotionally impactful scene, but it mostly works for me because of how simple it is. Life is complicated, so it really is nice to just take a minute to yourself in order to appreciate the simple pleasures of life. That's what 22 did during her time on Earth, and this mindset helped Joe to feel the same way that she did during her time. I truly adore this scene and what it represents. I think that as a whole, the film's message of going out and enjoying the little things in life is a very important one, which I always get a lot out of. Whilst many other films have a similar kind of message, they are nonetheless still always able to find themselves becoming very near and dear to my heart, and that's simply because I connect to this idea strongly. It's how I aim to live my life after all. The only problem with this message in this context, however, is the fact that it appeared in the film released during the pandemic year. You know, the one year where we couldn't go out and enjoy ourselves. Awkward. Or maybe it was actually the best year for this message to come out, as it may have made people more inspired to appreciate what was right in front of them once lockdown was lifted. Personally, I have no idea if this film came out at the best or the worst time, because I didn't watch it during the pandemic. But either way, it still inspired me when I did watch it well after the fact. But alongside the main theme of appreciating life, I also really love seeing Joe's struggles as an artist. Once again, this is an idea which I gravitate towards immensely whenever I see it within other films, so it was great to see it here too. I felt like Joe's anxieties about his dreams were very real and believable, and it's quite humbling to see a character realise that there is so much more to life than his one singular goal. Joe loves his jazz, and I can hardly blame him as jazz is awesome, but there is so much more to life than being a successful jazz musician. Trust me, you don't want to end up like Andrew Neiman. So I think that Joe's epiphany, which came as a result of 22's mindset, worked extra well when paired with his dreams of jazz, because it allowed him to look at life in a much bigger way, which would thus allow him to appreciate everything a lot more. So yeah, this film really resonates with me overall. As an artist myself, it's very easy to find myself hyperfixated in the zone, which can sometimes mean that I block out everything else, which isn't really a healthy mindset to have. Life is big and complicated, but it doesn't need to be. Sometimes the simplest moments are the best, and I think this idea is reflected well within this movie, because the best moments of the film often are the simplest scenes, like the aforementioned epiphany, or 22 trying pizza for the first time, or the barbershop scene. It's all brilliant. Whilst Pixar may have given me a free existential crisis through this film, these simple, beautiful moments help to make the overall experience a lot more comforting in a way, which thus makes it easier to take the themes on board. That's ultimately why I found this film so damn enjoyable and inspiring. It's just nice to watch, and whilst it may not be my favourite example of these kinds of themes, it's nonetheless a very good one which many people should watch. The fact that it's also really creative, funny, and impeccably well directed is just icing on the cake. Seriously, this might just be Pixar's best directed movie of the 2020s. It is just so well presented. Pete Docter's once again on the top of his game. And as I said before, I just adore the way that colour was used within this film. So yeah, just like all these other great Pixar films, there is so much that I adore here, and many parts of the story and message resonate with me strongly. But just like all these other great Pixar films, I've still got some minor issues here and there. And in the case of this film, I'll admit that I wasn't the biggest fan of the climax. I think that it went on for a bit too long, and after the emotional resolution presented from the epiphany scene, it just didn't feel as needed. Furthermore, there are a few plot holes which you can pick out with this film here and there. But honestly, none of this stuff really impacts my personal enjoyment of the film all that much. I still think that this is a fantastic modern outing from Pixar. Did it deserve to win Best Animated Feature? Maybe. Like, I'm not mad at its win, but there is still one other movie which is way better. But I will still say, however, that this film, as well as the other nominee which I haven't discussed yet, both deserve Best Picture nominations this year. I mean, come on, basically nothing came out in 2020. I don't think it's a stretch to say that these two films were more deserving of a nomination over, like, half of the actual nominees. Why couldn't you throw one of them a bone just this once? One day another animated film will get a Best Picture nomination. Hopefully, it will be sooner rather than later. But either way, Soul is a brilliant film, and I loved it a lot. Oh, and before you ask, no, I have absolutely no idea why Graham Norton of all people was in this movie. I mean, don't get me wrong, he was enjoyable to listen to, but it was just such a random casting choice to have alongside Jamie Foxx. But it is kind of funny though. Oh, and this should probably go without saying, but Moonwind is obviously nowhere near as epic a Graham Norton role as Father Noel Furlong.
Kids! It's your mother! Oh my God. And she's dead!
Look, I know it was a long time ago, but do any of you remember the Red Turtle segment where I talked about how consistently phenomenal Studio Ghibli is to me? Well, 43 films later, we are finally at the point of discussing the first proper Ghibli film, because remember, The Red Turtle was more of a co-production. Now, before I talk about it, I just want to remind you of the fact that we are currently in the phenomenal tier of movies. We're close to the top third of this list even. So the fact that it took until this long for me to talk about a Ghibli film, and specifically a Hayao Miyazaki film, just goes to show how amazing these films truly are. So please, don't get upset when I say that I didn't quite think that The Boy and the Heron was as near perfect as the other Miyazaki films on this list. It's still phenomenal, don't get me wrong, but it didn't quite hit me in the same way. And honestly, the truth is that I just didn't really get this movie a lot of the time. In a similar vein to Howl's Moving Castle, which I'll discuss later on this list, The Boy and the Heron is a very confusing film with a much greater emphasis on subtext and deeper thematic elements over the actual story. Now, there's obviously nothing wrong with this kind of approach, but I will admit that I was a little bit unsure of what this film was really going for. And unlike Howl, which had a large cast of endearing characters which helped to make the film easier for me to vibe with, The Boy and the Heron has a crazy unique fantasy world with a large cast who are constantly coming and going, and it is a bit of an overwhelming watch at many points. On a purely sensory level, this film is masterful, and I'll go over that point later, but I did struggle to truly connect with what the film was trying to say, thus forcing me to look into what other people have to say about this film, instead of simply just putting the pieces together myself. Now, I have no idea whether the film could have been more clear with these messages, or whether I'm just an idiot, but either way, I didn't quite connect as much to The Boy and the Heron, as I found it a bit overwhelming with everything that it had, which thus led to me feeling a bit alienated from the experience. However, unlike The Red Turtle, which I arguably had a similar issue with, I nonetheless still found myself massively enjoying The Boy and the Heron, because it's just got a great vibe to it. You see, Miyazaki films can kinda get away with confusing narratives and plot beats, because they are more than just normal movies. They are an experience. They are designed in a way for you to just simply immerse yourself into what is being shown to you, to the point that you don't really care that you have no idea what's been going on for the past half hour. The fantasy world within this movie has such a sense of awe and wonder to it that you can very easily find yourself getting immersed into what you're seeing. You want to explore more of this world with Mahito, and so you don't care what directions the story has to take for you to get there. And alongside the world, the characters are also great to watch. There may be a lot of them, but they're still great. I mean, the titular Heron is very entertaining, I loved Kiriko, and Mahito was a brilliant lead, and very different from other Ghibli protagonists I feel. Not only did he very clearly not want to be thrust into this fantasy world, but he's also a lot more emotionally mature than other kid characters who are in a similar position to him, like Chihiro for example. Whilst Chihiro was a scared kid, Mahito is a little bit older and thus more sure of himself, and whilst he does have his own internal struggles, he's nonetheless able to make more of an active effort to take action within the story. This therefore made him a great character to follow. And thanks to all of this great stuff with the story and characters, you can still very easily enjoy this movie on a completely passive level, and that's why I personally found myself able to love it in spite of the fact that my active engagement was a little bit hindered. Although, to be brutally honest, I feel like my confusion will become much less of an issue when I get around to rewatching this film. I mean, not only do confusing and previously alienating movies always become easier to watch when you're more familiar with them, but the film did honestly start to make a bit more sense to me after I actually looked into what other people had to say about it. You see, I initially wasn't too sure what the film was going for with its world, and I was unsure of how the world linked into Mahito's struggles. But then people reminded me of the title of the film. And no, I don't mean The Boy and the Heron. I mean the real title of the film. How Do You Live? And then things started to make a bit more sense. This is a story which looks into how Mahito lives. Within this film, Mahito is dealing with a lot. He lost his mother in the war, and now he's been forced to move to this new location with Natsuko, who has suddenly gone missing. He was struggling with a lot before he even entered the fantasy world, and he has particularly been stuck in the trauma of his past. But then, this new world shows off a lot of his past. Not only do we see a younger Kiriko, but we also see a younger version of Mahito's mother, who is now alive once again. When confronted with his past, Mahito is able to come to terms with it, and after being able to come to terms with his past, he's able to accept the present. And that's why Mahito is eventually able to return home to his new family, because he decides that this is what he wants. He wants to live in the present rather than dwelling on the past. How do you live? By focusing on the here and now, and that's what Mahito learns through his struggles and adventures which remind him of the past. Now, this is a very interesting reading, which I think helps to give this film a lot more substance in my eyes. Whilst I struggle to realise these points in the moment, this interesting thematic element to the film has helped me to understand it a little bit more in hindsight. And, as I said before, I just know that I will love the film even more when I eventually get around to rewatching it. And that's not all that this film has, as there's also some other interesting thematic readings that you can take away, such as the stuff with the creator of the fantasy world. Because you see, this guy is kinda like a reflection of Miyazaki himself. An old man creating fantasy worlds which found itself meaning a lot to someone. Yet, because his work is so brilliant, no one else can truly recreate what he's done. That's just like how no one else can truly be the next Miyazaki. He is a one-of-a-kind artist, and we all need to stop asking, oh, who's going to be the next Miyazaki? Because it's just unfair on everyone, particularly other creatives who strive to do their own thing. There is never going to be another Miyazaki, and that's okay. Look, I know this is probably not going to be Miyazaki's last film, as the dude will never retire until he's dead, and honestly I respect that mindset. But if this does end up becoming Miyazaki's last film, then it will be the perfect conclusion to the legacy that is left behind, as it does a great job at reflecting him as an artist. In fact, the whole movie kind of feels like a culmination of Miyazaki's other work, particularly the other films which ended up being nominated for this award. I mean, it's got deep and sometimes confusing thematic elements like Howl's Moving Castle, a unique and captivating fantasy world like Spirited Away, and a significant historical backdrop like The Wind Rises. And with that point in mind, it really does make this film seem like it's kind of Miyazaki's swan song in a way, and I think that helps to give this film a bit of extra beauty. Although, alongside this beauty, I think there's also some fascinating darker elements of the film which reflect the World War II backdrop, such as the stuff with the pelicans eating the wah-wah-wahs. Now, on the surface, this seems like a horrible thing for them to do, but when Mahito confronts an injured pelican, we learn that they only ate them because they were so desperate within their situation. Just like in all wars, people are forced to do bad things in a bad situation, just like the pelicans who are forced to eat these creatures in order to ensure their own survival. I thought that this was a really interesting idea, and this was actually something that I picked up on my own during my viewing of the movie, so I'm proud of myself for getting something substantial and interesting out of this scene. So yeah, this film is quite meaty, even if it doesn't appear so on the outside, and the more that I think about some of these things, the clearer the film becomes for me. Although, in saying all of this, there were still a few parts of the movie which continued to make little sense to me, even after all my research. First of all, why did Mahito bash his head in with the rock at the start? I know the film acknowledged this event by saying that it represented his malice or something, but I just didn't really understand the reason for why he did it in the first place. Was it just to get out of school or something? I really don't know. But whatever, that's kind of a minor point. My bigger issue came from the scene where Natsuko randomly started yelling at Mahito and saying that she hated him. I'm sorry? Where the hell did that come from? Like, what did Mahito ever do to you? That moment just felt so out of place to me. And what's worse is that this is never addressed again. So, what was the point in it? Did I miss something super obvious here? Because I never see anyone else bring the scene up. I'll be honest, this moment really took me out of this film, as it just felt incredibly out of character for Natsuko, and thus threw me off immensely. It definitely didn't help with my overall confusion with this part of the movie. But whatever, I've been moaning way too much about how I didn't really understand this film. Ultimately though, this didn't really matter too much to me. How Do You Live is a movie which is able to succeed for me based on pure vibes alone. It is a really immersive movie which definitely has something to say under the surface, and I think that it encapsulates everything amazing about Miyazaki's other work, whilst simultaneously showing how other artists shouldn't even bother trying to replicate his work, and should instead make their own choices and live in their own way. It's a brilliant movie through and through with fantastic direction, stunning animation, and a Joe Hisaishi score which deserved an Oscar nomination a hell of a lot more than Dial of Destiny. But, as you can probably guess, fantastic animation and an S-tier Joe Hisaishi score are what you can expect from any Miyazaki film, so expect me to repeat this point quite a lot in the future. Either way, How Do You Live is a one-of-a-kind movie which feels very personal to the artist who created it, and I respect it a lot even if it isn't quite a favourite of mine. But still, it 100% deserved its Oscar win. It may not be my favourite from this batch, but I would still argue that it's the most deserving of the award. And I cannot wait to talk about Miyazaki again later in this list. But before I do that, I'm going to keep on trekking through banger film after banger film.
Vicious Vikings!
Okay, I've been putting off this confession for a while now, but it's about time that I finally owned up to it. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned.
That's putting it mildly, 007.
But I didn't like How to Train Your Dragon as a kid. Yes, I'm being serious. I used to find this movie really boring and forgettable, which is why I never watched the sequels until a few years ago. And the fact that I used to feel this way is absolute proof that children shouldn't be allowed to have opinions. How to Train Your Dragon is absolutely incredible and is easily the tightest and least flawed film of the trilogy, which thus makes it the best one in my mind, and one of the best DreamWorks movies out there. And to think, I've still got 6 other DreamWorks movies to talk about in this ranking later on. Now you see why I'm a DreamWorks apologist, as my goodness I love these films. Anyway, let's just jump straight into why How to Train Your Dragon is so good. Now, I think the first thing which I immediately need to praise this film for is its pacing. Yes, that may be a bit of a weird thing to start with, but considering how relatively low-key and character-driven this film is, having a strong pace is essential. And luckily, this film is impeccably well paced. Not only is it never boring, but new plot beats are always happening at the perfect moments, which thus allows for the film to consistently develop new layers and add new conflicts over time. Each scene feels like a natural evolution from the last, and there isn't a moment which feels wasted. This therefore allows for an expert build-up of events and relations, which thus helps to keep the film consistently engaging to watch. And the primary way in which the pace helps to elevate the rest of the film can be seen through the growing bond between Hiccup and Toothless. They start off the film as natural-born enemies, before slowly developing a greater trust and bond over the course of the runtime, as they begin to connect over simple things like the drawings or Hiccup extending his hand. Their dynamic builds and builds to the point that Toothless selflessly tries to save Hiccup when he believes he's in danger, even if his action ultimately becomes a problem for both characters. This links in well to what I said about each scene feeling like a natural evolution from the last. Hiccup begins bonding with Toothless by feeding him and then fixing his tail wing, mostly out of guilt for damaging it in the first place, but as a result of these kinds of actions, the characters begin to form a level of mutual trust, which eventually leads into Hiccup being able to successfully fly with Toothless. And speaking of which, the test flight scene is legitimately one of the best scenes that DreamWorks has ever created, and that's surprising considering how simple it really is. It's nothing more than a dweeb running on the back of an oversized lizard through some rocks, but it's nonetheless able to create an immense feeling of awe and wonder. In fact, all of the flying scenes have a level of awe and beauty to them, as seen once again when Astrid is taken for a flight within the clouds. Oh, and speaking of which, whilst there are definitely better looking DreamWorks movies, including the 2 sequels, this film still looks absolutely gorgeous at so many points. And to be honest, I think this film may actually have some of DreamWorks' best cinematography. I mean, just look at some of these shots. The angles, the framing, the colours, oh man, it's all so good. Oh, and I obviously can't talk about how good the flying scenes are without bringing up John Powell's S-tier score. There was absolutely no reason for this man to go as hard as he did with the music in these scenes, but I'm so glad that he did, because they play a large factor into why this film is so iconic. I simply just can't imagine How to Train Your Dragon without da 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 da. But anyway, back on the topic of Hiccup and Toothless, I already talked about why they are a great duo when I talked about the sequels, and all of my points still apply here. Toothless will forever be the most adorable dragon ever, and the pair are just so much fun to watch together. However, this one stands out from the others in the trilogy because I love the initial bond that's shown here, and that's largely thanks to what it represents. You see, whilst the sequels largely reflected on themes of growth, this film is primarily all about inspiring change, as well as the worries which come from trying to fit in. Because Hiccup is so cool within the sequels, it's sometimes hard for me to remember that he was initially seen as a loser within this film. He wasn't the son that Stoic wanted, and he wasn't the Viking that Berk needed. However, he was the Viking that Berk deserved, as his status as a bit of an outcast is what allowed him to fully sympathise with the scared, wounded Toothless. He's not a Viking in the same way his dad is, and that fact is what allows him to show more compassion to a dragon, which thus inspires changes for the better. Hiccup may be different, but that ends up being the best thing for everyone else, as he is successfully able to provide a unique voice and convince everyone to change their minds and treat the dragons differently. He gave his own, level-headed perspective which was formed from a different view of the world, and that is what led to a positive change. I think that's a brilliant message, as it implies that everyone has something valuable to give, no matter how different they may seem from everyone else. It's a message which I relate to quite a lot, to be honest. But I also feel like the message is made better thanks to the usage of Stoic. Now, Stoic may appear to be your bog standard, "You can't do that, son, I'm not going to change." Why did I slip into Russian? Gerard Butler's Scottish. However, Stoic is able to still stand out as his own compelling character because he has a lot more to him than this single personality trait. First of all, it is easy for us to understand why he hates dragons so much, as they have been terrorizing the village, and, you know, he is the chief of the village, so it's his job to protect everyone. And alongside that, I feel like the second movie enhances this film quite a lot when it comes to Stoic's hatred of dragons, because, by this point in the timeline, he assumed that his wife was killed by dragons, although that plot point is also brought up here as well. So yeah, it's no wonder why he hates them so much. And this is important to see, because giving Stoic a valid reason for his beliefs helps to make his conflict with Hiccup more even-handed, as the audience is able to sympathise with him and his reasoning somewhat, even if he is more in the wrong. And another thing which I love about Stoic in this movie is this little moment where we see him visibly feel guilty after practically disowning Hiccup. It once again gives him more layers, which thus makes him so much more than just the dickhead dad. And I think that these little glimmers of humanity help to make it more believable that he would eventually change his mind by the end of the film when he actually sees the dragons help them. So yeah, Stoic is an antagonistic figure within this movie, and arguably plays more of a threat to Hiccup and Toothless than the actual villain, if you can even call it a villain. Yet, he is still really sympathetic, and it's great to see him change thanks to the influence of Hiccup's differing perspective, which was brought about by the fact that Hiccup didn't end up becoming like Stoic. Instead, Hiccup's differences were what brought the positive changes to Berg, and it was satisfying to see Stoic slowly realise the value in that. So yeah, the themes, messages, main characters and pacing are all amazing here. This begs the question though, why haven't I ranked the film higher? Well, I already alluded to the fact that this big-ass dragon isn't really that notable, and hardly counts as a main villain. So congratulations Drago, you're not the worst How to Train Your Dragon villain. But alongside this dragon, I still don't care much for the side characters here, besides Gobber of course, he's the best character in the franchise. The other dragon trainers are still annoying for me, especially Rough and Tough, and even Astrid isn't that good in this movie. I mentioned this before, but she is nowhere near as good here as she eventually becomes. Within the context of this film exclusively, she really doesn't have much else to her outside of being the tough love interest for Hiccup, and even though she does have a nice little arc by the second half, I still don't fully buy the two's connection. It wasn't until I saw their fantastic chemistry in the second film that I realised that they are peak couple goals. Here though, their relationship just feels pretty standard. It's not bad, don't get me wrong, and they have some nice moments here and there, but it is definitely the thing which the sequels improved upon the most. But that's the great thing about this trilogy. Each film very clearly follows on and develops from the last, which makes watching the whole trilogy immensely satisfying. I may not love the sequels as much as the original, but I always love the ways that they continue the main underlying narrative that was set up brilliantly here. So overall, How to Train Your Dragon is a perfectly paced, consistently engaging, beautiful, funny, well-meaning story which laid the foundations for the trilogy expertly. I would say that it's definitely enhanced by the sequels, however, it nonetheless works so well as a standalone experience too, and I am definitely very happy that it got a nomination, even if it's not quite my favourite of the 2010 batch. And before you ask, no, I'm not watching the live-action remake. I don't care if it's better than the Disney ones, it's still creatively bankrupt in my eyes. Why would I choose to watch the same movie again with a live-action filter over it? I mean, it's fine if you like it, but it's definitely not for me, so I won't be watching it. I'd rather just stick with the animated medium that I love so much. Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron is the second best film from the 2002 batch to have Spirit in its title. And it was also a surprising masterpiece. Like seriously, I heard rumours of this alleged DreamWorks movie about a horse, which is actually quite good. But no one told me that it was this good, and I'm so mad that it took me so long to actually watch it, because it is easily one of the most simple, yet beautiful films that DreamWorks has ever created. Now, you probably don't remember, but when I talked about Brother Bear, I said that I wished it was more like this film. So, why did I think that, you may be wondering? Well, it's because of my first major positive with Spirit. The animals don't talk. Hallelujah! Hallelujah! Look, I do enjoy talking animal movies when done right, but for a slow-paced, character-driven film like Spirit, having the animals only communicate through neighs and whinnies is a hell of a lot more effective. It not only prevents the possibility of obnoxious celebrities telling unfunny jokes to each other to keep the kids entertained, as this film doesn't care about the kids watching, which is probably why it flopped, but either way, and instead, the limitations of Spirit allow itself to tell a story entirely through the visuals, and this can be seen through how the film uses the medium of animation to its fullest show's potential by giving the horses so much expression and personality to the point that you don't need dialogue to understand how they're feeling. Horses are some of the blankest faces out of any mainstream animal, yet somehow, Spirit himself has so much damn personality and wit to him. This is what I mean when I say that Brother Bear should have been more like this. Having the animals not talk would have been glorious and would have fit the more mature setup to that film, and it would have prevented it from turning into a generic kiddie film after the first half hour. Furthermore, the lack of communication here works in a thematic way, as it shows how Spirit is from a completely different world to the humans. In their mind, he is nothing more than a wild stallion who isn't on the same level of intelligence, even though he totally is in this case. However, this makes Spirit's bondage with Little Creek hit that bit harder, as they're able to bond in spite of nature's boundaries. It's all just brilliant to see unfold. Again, Brother Bear really could have emphasized the new world that Kenai has been thrown into by having no dialogue. But whatever, it is what it is. Although, all this talk of dialogue does lead me on to my one major criticism with this movie. And that's Matt Damon.
Matt Damon.
Now, I personally don't think that Matt Damon's overlaid narration describing Spirit's thoughts is that much of a buzzkill, as he doesn't appear too much within the film, and he is pretty easy to ignore. However, he was still an incredibly unnecessary inclusion. The funniest part about this movie is the fact that you could literally remove Matt Damon entirely, and the film would play out in exactly the same way, as the visuals can tell the story just fine on their own. It's such a weird inclusion which felt like it was forced in to make the film easier to understand, which clearly shows a lack of trust within the audience. But whatever, I can personally look past it because the rest of the film is just so great. Now, I mentioned earlier that Spirit himself was so damn expressive, and that fact leads me on to the point that the character modes within this film are just simply incredible. Now, I will definitely admit that this film does have a really simple story to it, and there are large stretches of time when nothing really happens. This film is less a narrative piece, and more so a character-driven story with Spirit trying to get home, but bonding with others on the way. And as a result, this film is definitely not for everyone, and I already know that there are many people who just couldn't get into it very much, and that's okay. However, for me personally, character is what appeals to me the most about films, and so Spirit works so well for me because I'm consistently invested by all of these compelling characters. As I said before, I can fully understand Spirit's personality just from his expressions and actions, and I loved how determined he always was. His main desire is to return home, and this goal helps us to care for and relate to him immensely, but it also explains why he never gives in and obeys his kidnappers, and instead spends the whole movie fighting back against the Americans, and now you can see why I like this movie. Not to mention, he's always awesome to watch because he is such a freaking badass. Yes, I'm calling a horse a badass, but can you really blame me? I mean, have you seen that cliff jump scene at the end? Holy shit, I got goosebumps watching that, and I legitimately started cheering at my screen when I saw it, as I was just so caught up in the awesomeness of the moment. And alongside the epic climax, many moments within this film made it feel like I was watching the horse version of Sisu with how over the top yet awesome some of these scenes were. I mean, come on, this horse single-handedly held back Western expansion in America by blowing up 2 trains after getting them to crash into each other. That's awesome! Yeah, take that, you genocidal monsters! Side note, but apparently a lot of brain-dead conservatives disliked this movie when it came out because it portrayed the Western expansion in a negative light. Good. So yeah, it's clear that I am always invested in Spirit and his struggles, because he is just bloody awesome. However, he's also really compelling because the film always ensures that it slows down as he bonds with other characters, which thus helps to make the film feel more grounded, believable, and real, despite how obviously absurd it is at points. Spirit's growing dynamic with Little Creek is slow, as they start out as just mutual acquaintances who helped each other out one time. However, in spite of this help, their bond is pretty weak at this point, as Little Creek did still capture Spirit, which thus makes Spirit quite cynical and uncooperative. However, the pair eventually grow to care for and help out one another more and more as the film progresses, before they both eventually take part in and win that epic as hell climax on the cliffs. It's all just so great to watch. And then there's Spirit dynamic with the female horse, which honestly doesn't feel like a forced-in romance, as it once again takes its time to develop gradually. It's great seeing such a hard-nosed character like Spirit warm up to another horse and become more compassionate as a result, while still being a badass. I just love the character journeys here, and I ultimately ended up getting so invested in this film that I was actually quite emotional when it looked like Lady Horse was about to die, and because I hadn't seen this film before, I wasn't even sure whether it was going to be a fake out or not, and I wasn't even mad at the fact that it was a fake out. In fact, I was happy to see her okay because I wanted these characters to be alright, because I just loved them so much. Now admittedly, the colonial American characters are definitely not as interesting as the main trio, as they're not that deep or anything, but they really don't need to be. They more so act as a representation of the Western expansion as a whole, and so all I really needed was for them to get humiliated and thrown off of Spirit's back because it's funny. Although, with that being said, I didn't really get what the main villain just kinda gave up at the end. It was a bit weird, and maybe the one part of the movie which got a bit too positive and sentimental. But well, it's no real biggie for me. What else is great here? Well, the animation is absolutely incredible. I've always loved it when films use a mixture of 2D and 3D animation, and this film is a clear reason for why, as there's so many dynamic set pieces here which allow for some incredible action throughout, like you would see in 3D animation, but it also retains the serene beauty and colour which is more so present in 2D animation. So that helps to make this film a great blend of styles. And, as I've mentioned 100 times in this segment, the animation made the characters so damn expressive here, which really helped for me to care for them. And quick message to studio executives, this is a film which fundamentally will not work in live action. I mean, can you just imagine a blank-faced horse trying to engage the audience? It will be like the Lion King remake, but worse. Anyway, alongside the visuals, the music is also incredible. Although, I will admit that I'm not mad on the Bryan Adams songs. They weren't awful by any means, but some of them were a bit corny and over-explanatory. It definitely doesn't top Brother Bear in the corn department, but it's still not amazing. I did like the ending song though, as I felt like the film truly earned it. However, whilst the lyric songs were a bit hit and miss, the instrumental score was so fucking good. It was so sprawling and epic and beautiful, and I've constantly gone back to re-listen to it. In fact, dare I say it's one of Hans Zimmer's best scores. If you don't want to watch the movie, I implore you to at least listen to the soundtrack, as it is practically perfection in my eyes. So overall, Spirit is just so damn endearing, captivating and beautiful, and I absolutely loved it to bits. It has some flaws here and there, and it won't be everyone's cup of tea, but I personally absolutely adored it. It obviously had no chance of winning any awards, but I'm so glad that it got some recognition at the very least. It's a very underrated DreamWorks movie, and is definitely worth checking out. But I'm not watching the sequel though, as it looks shit. Who the fuck asked for a Spirit sequel anyway? Seriously, who asked for this? Why does it exist?
Shoes. I beg your pardon? Shoes.
Coco is an absolutely beautiful movie, both aesthetically and emotionally. It is often regarded as being one of, if not the best Pixar film to come out of the 2010s, and yeah, it more than earns that title. It is a wonderful film, and let's jump straight into talking about why. Although to be fair, you probably already know exactly what I'm going to say for this segment. So, first of all, I think that this is one of Pixar's most well-directed films, as the visual aesthetic here truly allows the world to come to life. In a similar vein to Corpse Bride, the land of the dead within Coco is, ironically enough, full of life and really colourful, and it just looks stunning. The colours for this movie are impeccable, and if you know me, you know that I love colour, so it's only natural that this film appeals to me on that basis alone. However, I also liked how deeply ingrained into Mexican culture this film and its world is. Now obviously, as a Brit, I don't exactly know much about the culture being presented here, but I nonetheless loved seeing it. I particularly enjoyed seeing the ways that these cultural depictions of the land of the dead were brought to reality within this film. Not only do things like the bridge look super cool, but I loved the way that they portrayed the stuff with the photos. The film made it very clear that leaving photos out for the dead is super important, and I just loved how the film interpreted that fact for these airport-like security checks. It's a really fun and creative concept, and things like this help this film to stand out as its own thing, separate from other stories which cover the ideas related to Dia de los Muertos. So yeah, I love the general presentation of this movie. And alongside the visuals, the music is also incredible here. Which is good, because a movie all about music should have good music, and luckily, this film does. Not only do I already love the sound of traditional Mexican music, which thus automatically makes this OST appealing to me, but the songs themselves are brilliant, from the song Hector and Miguel played in the middle of the movie, and, of course, Remember Me. And oh boy, we will get back to this song, don't you worry. So yeah, I love the music within this film. And I also loved the way that music was handled thematically here. You see, the film very clearly makes an effort to show the beauty that the art of music can bring. It's Miguel's passion, and you want to see him be able to enjoy it, rather than being oppressed by his overbearing music-hating grandma and his other music-hating dead relatives. The film shows how much music brings people together, and over the course of the runtime, the musical moments are associated with feelings of joy and whatnot. But, alongside that, I also like how much the film exposes the issues related to music, not with the art form itself, but with the culture and industry around it. Whilst music is a positive form of art and expression, it still breeds selfish, egotistical musicians like Ernesto de la Cruz, who the film is very explicitly critical of because De La Cruz is an evil motherfucker. And whilst I'm on that topic, I want to say that I think De La Cruz is a fantastic villain, and is probably the only good Disney or Pixar twist villain to come out in recent years. Not only is he an actual villain with clear motivations and goals, but he actually gets time to be villainous. The twist doesn't come in the last 20 minutes, which thus means that we get more time to sit with his previous evil actions, and thus we feel more intimidated by his current presence within the story. He's a great villain first, and a great twist second, and that's how twist villains should be done in my eyes. But on the topic of that twist, I think it really does do a great job at raising the stakes of the film, and it definitely comes into the story at the perfect time. You see, before this point, the film was quite low-key and fun. The only threat to Miguel at this point was his own family, and because of these relatively low stakes, it was very easy to just have fun vibing with Hector and Miguel in the Land of the Dead. But then we learned that De La Cruz murdered Hector, and everything changes. Not only do we now have a real threat to the characters, but everything that we thought we knew about Hector is flipped on its head, and suddenly he went from being a fun sidekick to one of the most tragic Pixar characters out there. Due to being poisoned, his family basically shunned him, and so he was never able to return to the land of the living to see them again. It's heartbreaking enough to be killed, but to have those you love the most turn your back on you due to the actions of one selfish arsehole is even worse. I think that's another reason for why De La Cruz is a great villain. He's such a personal burden to Hector, which thus aids the emotional conflict of the film. And naturally, with all this talk of the tragedy of Hector, we are brought back to Remember Me. And oh my goodness, I love that scene where Hector sings it to Miguel and we see a flashback to his daughter. It is such a beautiful showcase of family love, and it also once again does a great job at showing how music can bring people closer together. It's a brilliant combination of everything that the film has been building up towards emotionally, and it is an absolute gut punch of a scene. On a side note, I love the contrast between the different versions of Remember Me. De La Cruz's is very poppy and upbeat and a bit phony in a way, whilst Hector's is slower, gentler, and feels much more genuine and fitting of the lyrics. It does a great job of showing the difference between the real artist and the hack fraud. So yeah, I adore this scene. Yet it's only the second most emotional scene in this movie, as it still pales in comparison to one of the best endings to any animated movie ever. Yeah, you all know why this scene is just perfect. It's the kind of scene which turns even the biggest hard-ass into a weeping wreck, and if you do not feel the tiniest bit of emotion during the scene, you simply just aren't human. I don't want to talk to you. Basically everything that I said about the previous Remember Me scene applies here, yet amplified to 1,000. In this moment, we truly get to see the power of music, and the very clear impact that Hector's love had on Mama Coco, and it just resolves the film in the single most perfect way imaginable. It's not an epic climax, instead it is a quiet, softer moment showcasing family love, and it just leaves me weeping every time I see it. It truly is the 2010's answer to the opening of Up. Oh, and the emotions don't stop there, as I also adore the very ending where we get to see Hector with his shoes on once again, thus symbolising how he's been reaccepted into the family of shoemakers. God, I love this movie, but man, it leaves me dehydrated by its end as a result of all the water I've just expelled. What else can I say? This whole final act is just pure Pixar magic and I adore it. Now yes, admittedly it does sometimes seem like many people adore Coco just for this ending, but I honestly think that it's fair to do so, as a resolution is incredibly important to the overall feelings towards a movie, and because this film wraps up its themes and emotional moments in the most perfect way imaginable, it makes all of the previous build-up feel worth it, which thus makes the film as a whole much better. So yeah, I do think that it's fair for someone to call this one a masterpiece purely on the basis of the ending being so perfect, as endings are meant to elevate what came before. But to be fair, the rest of the film is still really bloody good. As I said at the start, the film looks beautiful, and there's plenty of earlier scenes which leave their own impact, such as the final death scene, which admittedly gave me major anxiety. Please don't forget me when I'm gone. However, the reason for why I wouldn't rank this film higher is because I don't find every part of the movie super engaging. Although, strangely enough, I do think that basically every scene justified its existence in a way. Yet, despite that, I still found the film a bit slow around the middle, so maybe these scenes just need to be trimmed down a little bit, I'm not sure. Also, I admit that I found the film a bit predictable at points. The twist of De La Cruz was great, but I'll be honest, on my first viewing I completely guessed that Hector was Miguel's real great-great-grandfather, because it is pretty obvious. This means that every time I watch this movie, I sometimes find myself just waiting for the characters to catch up with what was so obvious to me. But whatever, these points are so minor in the grand scheme of things. At the end of the day, Coco is an emotional gut punch of a movie which does a successful job at bringing the worlds of Mexican culture to life in unique and gorgeous ways, with plenty of fun moments and ideas to go alongside it. Whilst I wouldn't call it a perfect film, it definitely does have perfect moments to it, and for that reason, it deserves to be ranked as one of Pixar's best films from recent years. Plus, this movie features Dante, so it should be ranked this highly for that reason alone.
I'll show you the life of the mind! Ah!
Inside Out 2 is my favourite movie, which I absolutely hate. Okay, I promise this statement will make sense later. So I feel like the general consensus towards Inside Out 2 at the moment is pretty lukewarm, I'd say. Like, people enjoyed it when it came out, but I don't see it discussed too much nowadays, which is surprising for the second highest grossing animated movie of all time. But the main reason for why this lack of discussion nowadays surprises me is because I personally think that this is one of Pixar's best films. In fact, dare I say, it's not only their best non-Toy Story sequel, but it's also their best film since the first Inside Out. Although as you can guess from this ranking, it's still pretty neck and neck with Coco. However, I ever so slightly preferred Inside Out 2, because I just personally got a lot more out of it, particularly when it came to its themes. You see, I connected with the first Inside Out quite a lot back when I saw it as a kid, and so I was really happy to see that the sequel made an effort to grow up with its audience. Those of us who saw the original film as youngsters are now being treated with a new film made for a slightly older audience, which thus means that I am still able to connect with these movies on a deeper level in spite of my changing perspectives on the world. Now, we obviously all knew that a sequel to Inside Out was inevitable, and was arguably very warranted. Kids grow up and their emotions and feelings change alongside it. It was only a matter of time before the awkward years of teenagehood were covered within a follow-up film. And we finally got to see it unfold within this movie, and it turned out so great. It could have been so easy for this film to be nothing more than 90 minutes of puberty jokes, but instead, it was a very worthwhile experience for teens and adults thanks to all of its very important, emotionally driven themes and ideas which focus on these turbulent years of change, and the difficulties which come from these new problems that you begin to face as you get older. Such as anxiety, who is easily the most substantial thing to discuss in relation to this movie. My goodness, Anxiety was a character portrayed absolutely flawlessly, to the point that I fucking despised her. She's a well-written character who embodies so many things associated with the feelings of anxiety, but because of that fact, I hate her because she's too damn real. When she starts panicking about little things like how to move Riley's arms, and then hijacks Imagination Land to turn it into a sweatshop where the worst possible outcomes are envisioned, thus leading to a sleepless night of overthinking. Bro, I did not need to be given a reflection of myself. I don't even have particularly bad anxiety. It's pretty standard for me, all things considered. But even I started to panic whilst watching, because I'm literally in this movie and I don't like it. The Imagination Land scene especially was what made me realise on first viewing that this film was not going to be pulling any punches when it came to how brutally realistic it was going to be with its themes. Now, I definitely respect the film a lot for covering these topics, but it does admittedly play a part into why I kinda hate this movie. It just hit too close to home for me, and I was getting anxiety myself whenever the character of Anxiety started messing things up for Riley, particularly when it came to the stuff with the notebook. And I subconsciously related to so much of what was happening on screen that I actively started to feel depressed. This little orange dickhead left me feeling miserable as I was watching this film, and I was definitely on the side of anger when he suggested punting Anxiety into the dump. Fuck you, Anxiety! It's pretty telling that this was my initial reaction to seeing her.
Hello! I'm Anxiety.
Fuck you!
Now, I obviously am kind of exaggerating my points here for comedic effect. Whilst Anxiety's presence did make the film a really tough watch for me at many points, it can't take away from how much I respect the film for its willingness to present these difficult ideas to the audience. It may have left me squirming in my seat, but at least I got a worthwhile reaction out of it, and I can confidently say that this film has stuck with me long after watching it. And even though no rewatch will ever quite top that initial cinema viewing from last year, this is still a movie which I get so much out of thematically. And this leads me on to talking about the ending of the film. All of the build-up with Anxiety's control was compelling and hard-hitting for me, and it all culminated into the ending panic attack scene. Now, I know the internet likes to make jokes about animated films with realistic panic attack scenes, but the truth is, the reason for why scenes like this are praised is because it is such an important thing to show to an audience, particularly nowadays. It's only recently that mental health has started to be taken more seriously, so it's important for the media to portray these important struggles in respectful, noteworthy ways, and Inside Out 2 is one of the best examples of this. Now, the Inside Out movies are always great at portraying complex psychological ideas in a visual, easy to understand way, and that's no different here. Anxiety's rapid cloud of despair is a great way to show how all this overthinking and fear eventually builds into a situation where the mind just kinda shuts down. You don't really know what's happening, and it's scary and painful as a result, and the film highlights the severity, as well as the lack of control which occurs within this moment. It is a scene which, just like the rest of this movie, doesn't hold back when it comes to how it portrays this difficult situation. And because of how brutally realistic it is an emotional gut punch for me to watch unfold. Once again, I hate watching it, but it's so important to see within a film like this, and it makes the whole experience and the build-up worth it. So yeah, all of the themes which come from Anxiety are perfect, but she's also just a good character on top of that. I think her erratic personality fits the character well, and it makes sense that she's as controlling as she is, as the feelings of anxiety often dominate the mind. And she's also a great parallel to how controlling Joy was in the first movie. But ultimately, just like Joy, we are still made to sympathise with her in the end, as we can very clearly see that she does have Riley's best interests at heart, even if she's still quite misguided in how she approaches the issues that's being faced. So yeah, Anxiety's a great character all around. However, she does admittedly kind of overshadow the other new emotions, who are quite lacking all things considered. Okay, sure, Ennui's a mood and embarrassment is kinda cute, but like, what do we really get out of Envy's presence, for instance? Not much. She doesn't take anything away from the film, but she doesn't really add much either. Thankfully, the OG characters are still just as great as usual. Fear, Disgust, and Anger were probably the funniest characters for me in the original, so it was great to see more of them here, as instead of being stuck in headquarters, they actually get to join in on the adventure, which is pretty fun to see. But alongside having a fun presence, I like seeing their character development, particularly Anger's. Ironically enough, Anger is given a much softer side within this movie, but it ultimately works for me thanks to moments like the part where he comforts Joy after a meltdown. This moment feels more significant because you never expect to see the rage guy so calm and collected, so it's quite satisfying to see it here. So yeah, I love these three once again. Although I do admittedly miss hearing Bill Hader as Fear. His voice was just so perfect that no one can really replace him. And alongside these guys, Sadness and Joy were as great here as they were in the original. Admittedly, Sadness isn't as prominent within this film, but I still liked her presence nonetheless, particularly when she got a chance to interact with Joy. And the reason for why I liked that is because this film actually remembered to maintain character continuity. Joy is still the same developed character as she was at the end of the first movie. She's not overly controlling and actually lets other emotions do their thing. And, most significantly, she's maintained a really nice friendship with Sadness. She hasn't regressed in character, and instead, it feels like the events of the first movie actually mean something. Yeah, Joy may joke around with Sadness and the other emotions, but ultimately, there's a level of respect here which wasn't present within the original film, and that therefore shows growth. And speaking of this growth, I like seeing the new ways that Joy develops within this film. As I said before, Anxiety works as a nice parallel to Joy due to her controlling actions, which thus means that the conflict between the two characters is really compelling to watch unfold, as Joy gets a more clear look into what it's like to be tossed aside when needed. But the main reason for why Joy is so compelling here is because we get to see how much her usual status quo has been shattered by the events of this film. Before Anxiety took over, Joy was so used to being an important part of Riley's life. While she does let the other emotions take the helm a lot more, she nonetheless still feels like the natural leader who keeps everyone in check, even in the worst times. But eventually, she just can't keep up, which thus leads to a meltdown. And, once again, I found this scene very realistic and emotionally impactful, because I could relate to it immensely. I'd say that I'm quite a positive person nowadays, but my goodness, it is so hard to keep that up when all everyone around you does is complain and complain and complain, and it just leads to days where I find it harder to maintain my usual composure, as the difficult environment around me just knocks the joy out of myself. And speaking of which, there's also that scene in the back of the mind where Joy came to this lovely realization.
Maybe this is what happens when you grow up. You feel less joy.
Bro, I did not need to hear that. Thanks, I'm depressed now. God, I hate this movie. But it is very accurate, and it adds a lot to Joy's character as she has to come to terms with the fact that Riley will continue to grow up, even without her. Once again, it's a difficult thing to come to terms with, but I appreciate the willingness of this film to cover it. So yeah, Joy's growth within this movie is great to see, and it's just nice to see a Disney-owned sequel which actually feels like a necessary continuation of the story, rather than an unnecessary cash grab. Although, this discussion of sequels does lead me on to a point which I hear a lot of other people make regarding how rehashy this film is. You see, many people will point out the fact that the story here is basically the exact same as the original, but with the characters slightly shifted around. And I do get that criticism. maybe this film is a bit derivative at points. But personally, I didn't mind too much, as I thought that there was enough creativity within this film exclusively, which thus helped it to stand out. I mean, for starters, I loved the inclusion of the sense of self, which was something not present within the original, but it fit within the context of this film because Riley is that little bit older. As we grow up, we tend to rely more on our thoughts rather than our feelings, and the sense of self was a great way to reflect that fact. Plus, it linked in well to anxiety and the negative thoughts that she brought, which thus culminated towards the great climax once again, where the film shows the combined importance of good and bad thoughts, thus explaining that it's okay to not be perfect. Once again, this is a really hard lesson to come to terms with, but it's important to hear, and it was great to see this film cover it. And it just made sense to save these kinds of ideas for the sequel featuring the 13-year-old Riley, rather than the 11-year-old one. But alongside having its own unique ideas, I also think that this film does a great job at subverting what was expected from the original film. An obvious example of this can be seen through how Imagination Land has been warped by anxiety into something much more depressing and harmful, but another great example of this subversion can be seen in the back of the mind scene. You see, this scene plays out almost identically to the memory dump scene from the first film. Joy's at her lowest point, and so she comforts herself by looking at old memories. The plot beats are the same, the context is the same, and even the music is almost identical. However, the main difference is the fact that, in this film, the memories are all bad, which thus provides Joy with no comfort. She's just left to wallow in the fact that she can't fix what's happening, and thus, she accepts her new, lesser role in Riley's life. The association with the original scene arguably makes this subversion more powerful in my mind, and because of moments like this, I didn't ultimately mind the film being a bit rehashy at points, as it arguably made the experience more impactful for me. So yeah, there is just so much that I love about this movie and what it has to say. I personally found the experience to be brutally realistic, which thus made it an incredibly powerful watch, and many parts of it have stuck with me long after first seeing it. I mean, you could just tell how much I got out of this film based off of how much I had to say in this segment alone. And all of this thematic talk is without me mentioning the fact that the film looks gorgeous, there's still plenty of creative and fun ideas present here, and, in spite of how depressing it gets, it can still be a hilarious watch at points. It's not quite as funny as the first movie, I'll admit, but it does still have some epic moments, such as the stuff with Bluffy and Pouchy. Oh, and Lance is the greatest character of all time. Find someone in your life who looks at you the way that Disgust looks at Lance. Furthermore, I appreciated the fact that this film gave more focus to Riley. It helped to make the real world scenes a lot more compelling, which thus aided the overall tension of the film. Thanks to everything that this film has going for it, from its themes to its creativity to its subversions and its characters, Inside Out 2 is a recent Pixar film which was successfully able to capture the same magic and emotion as its classics, and so I loved it to bits. With that being said though, I would actually be more willing to sacrifice this film's nomination in favour of Look Back. I know I prefer this film to Avengers Most Foul, but personally, I'm more willing to snub a Disney-owned film in favour of an anime masterpiece over snubbing my goats Wallace and Gromit. So yes, even though I love Inside Out 2, I don't quite love it as much as Look Back. Seriously, Look Back is so good, although I was not at all prepared for how devastating it ended up being. I don't quite like it as much as the 3 other films from the 2024 batch of nominees, but I can nonetheless see why people got upset at its snub. Although, considering how much I love the actual nominees, I'm not personally that mad here. It's at least less offensive than the silent voice snub. So yeah, even though I prefer Look Back, I'm chill with Inside Out 2's nomination because I really do love this movie and I personally get a lot out of it.